This is like an all-round question, but how exactly do you expect that Brexit will impact these movements and charities to, like, yeah?
Just go around.
Great question. Well, actually, one thing that's a big issue for us is that it takes so much attention and resources away. So kind of if everyone in Parliament is focused on Brexit, which they will be from now until probably March and afterwards, this is like the key months, there's other really big social justice issues that either don't get the attention that they need or they're put through very quickly because there's just so much else going on. And I think that would actually be it just takes a lot of the oxygen out of the room, and other things either get left behind or they get moved through at a rate where they really need more kind of scrutiny from civil society and in Parliament.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it, that we're meeting here on a night which will go down in history because the government has been found in contempt of Parliament today, believed to be the first government in history to be found in contempt of Parliament for not sharing the full legal argument from the Attorney General in regards to Brexit, which I believe they will now have to do. I think from an LGBT plus perspective, as well as agreeing with the fact that issues that should be being focused on aren't being, because all the oxygen is indeed just taken up by the Brexit discussion. I think it's interesting that from a human rights perspective overall, I think, if Brexit does end up happening, and speaking personally and not on behalf of the LGBT Centre, I very much hope that it doesn't, but if it does, I think we will see a situation where the Prime Minister and the Trade Ministers and all the rest will be having to turn somewhat of a blind eye to human rights. They shouldn't be doing, but I think they will feel that they need to do that because they need those trade deals, and they need those trade deals from wherever they come. And I think, when you have a situation where I know Russia-British tensions relations aren't great at the moment, but when you had a situation where there was in effect an LGBT plus genocide in Chechnya around about a year ago, which many believe is still happening, and you get the government certainly a year or so ago being prepared to have relatively friendly relations with perhaps not with Chechnya itself, but with Russia more widely, and it just makes you think. When you go and when you see the Prime Minister going and shaking hands with the Saudi prince, and it just sits uncomfortable with me. And I appreciate that. I'm not that kind of starry-eyed and idealistic that I don't understand that government leaders meet, and sometimes they have to meet leaders perhaps they'd rather not meet. But I just feel that Brexit will end up having if it happens, will end up having a really adverse effect on human rights because the government needs those trade deals. We're going to be much poorer than we were, and so that is why groups like all ours here, and hopefully all of you, need to be fighting loud and clear to make sure that these issues are still being raised and high up the agenda.
I think for me personally, sort of writing about this stuff, the thing about being a writer is you kind of basically write about the shit that happens. So I suppose we'd write about Brexit and how that's affects everything. But I think in terms of things like funding for artists to do their work, I think that there'll be massive cut in that. But the point of writing and poetry and everything, I think we don't really see borders the way maybe other sort of professions see borders. So for us, Brexit will just be another border that we have to basically talk about, write about, hopefully try to do something about. But yeah, I think it's the funding that will be the main issue, because there's already limited funding for things like poetry, and when you take the EU out and it just becomes the UK, which is huge loss.
Yeah, definitely the same point. So the EU Cultural Development Fund, which has enabled some incredible projects and collaborations across borders. Now that, if we're forced to leave, then those collaborations which have really enriched all of the arts. I mean, music, theatre, circus, dance, poetry, everything. And I hope that we'll find a way somehow to keep enabling and funding those collaborations. I mean, so many poets and artists I work with are from across Europe, from across the world, and we're just going to have to find ways to work together, often across arts, to keep things going somehow. And I guess the other thing is just how Brexit has enabled and excused xenophobia around people from different countries of Europe, and also just people from outside of the UK, and that just makes the work of groups like Bards Without Borders, which is a refugee migrant group, even more important, because if your voices aren't visible and raised, then the only people who are representing you are perhaps the tabloids. So you have to keep on elbowing your way into venues and festivals and programs. Otherwise, you don't speak for yourself.
I think Brexit will have a massive impact on us due to our concentration being on refugees, and if the curbs on immigration that some people want to have come through, then I imagine that's just going to increase the amount of refugees in the world, because I imagine we'll be taking less in. So I imagine that would give us lots to talk about, and unfortunately a bigger platform, and unfortunately that means we may have to do more and get more people involved.
Yeah, I think it will take more than Brexit to stop there being a metal community, and we will continue to work for everybody the best way we can. I believe in building bridges, not walls.
Go back to the morning after the Brexit vote. I had just walked 2 children to primary school, and on the way back from that drop-off, witnessed a banana being thrown at a BME family who were doing the same school trip. And I think what's really interesting is Laila was saying that there's a narrative. As a historian, we've too long believed in the narrative that civil rights conquered race. It's done. It's over. We don't need to bother about that anymore. Civil rights movements were a success in the 50s and 60s. And I think one of the, you can call it a positives through a historical lens, one of the positives of Brexit, of Trumpism, is that it shows that narrative is false. That you can't hide from the fact that there is still a huge amount of work that needs to be done on civil rights, human rights, social justice all around the world. So in that sense, they're not. I wouldn't call them positive, but it serves a useful function, I think, in reflecting what society is really still like in all of its dark corners and recesses. I hope that the workshops that we'll put on as part of the Festival of Justice will be one of the things that we can do. There are so many different things that people can do. Not losing hope is one of them, and continuing to work in lots of different ways. I was discussing it in the back of the room when we came in that there was some student protest on campus here 2 years ago, and I sidled up to the back of them to try and hear what was going on and to understand what the nature of the protest was. And I was aghast to hear students asking each other, what do they do? What happens next? What should we be doing? Because they had lost the art of protest. And I think that there is nothing more important than knowing how to protest if that's what you want to do. So certainly as a civil rights historian, one of the things that I would love to do is continue, what I think is a really important thing to do, is to continue to teach people the art of successful protest.
Well, I think by using the word hope, it says everything really. I think we will use hope and be passionate about what we're doing and just not stop.
Yeah, I'm encouraging everyone else to do the same, because someone's got to do something, and if everybody does nothing, then nothing's going to get done. So encouraging others to step up and maybe help out.
Definitely. I think the solution comes in working together, like having the metal community supporting the movements around refugee rights is incredible. And if more of the other millions of different communities could offer that same kind of support, that would be amazing. And if artists could, instead of working in their little poet boxes, work with other artists, and that would, because we're at a time where resources are short, you just need to work together, you need to bridge communities, LGBT community bridging over to the refugee community, it makes a lot of sense. And I think working outside of your bubble, like, you know, we did take Bards Without Borders out of London, out of the comfortable, cosy, very human rights friendly audiences, and I wish that we'd actually plotted out like the 10 most xenophobic places in the UK. I don't know if there's someone who's done that research, maybe places where there are far right supporters, perhaps something like that. And if you could develop a project, because you can't just arrive in a town with a group of refugee migrant poets and expect a warm reception. You need a long, well-funded project where you build relations, where you find the points of common interest, and then slowly, perhaps you build an understanding. But that takes a lot of time. And I think if there was the kind of the will and sadly the money for such projects, then you could really have an impact.
I would say as writers we have to keep writing, because often writers write about what they know, where they've come from, and the more diverse voices that write, the more we will diversify the world of sort of publications out there. Because at the moment, if you walk into Waterstone, you have very similar narratives. It would be great to walk into Waterstone and be able to read a poetry, like historic books, novels from like across the world. And I think what that does is, if you don't know about the other, then they become monster. But if you read about them constantly, then we're just all humans. And I think that's what writing can do. We have to go into the publishing world. There has to be more voices from people of minority backgrounds, so we can diversify all the books and the literature that's out there, and then that will hopefully be able to create a understanding of the world that is more authentic than what's out there. Because if we stop writing, then we'll just have the tabloids, and what the tabloid essentially creates is a culture of fear, that is that the other person is bad, that the other person is barbaric, and that the other is violent and hates you, and then you find out, no, they're just a human being who have the same struggles in life as you do. So I think that's what we can do.
Definitely. I think gatherings like this, large or small, are really important, and so thanks again to Ambrose and to the university for organising tonight. I think volunteering with organisations like the LGBT Centre, I mean, we have a small staff team, but they can only do so much, bless their hearts, and they're often busy providing the frontline work and support, and so, you know, the more volunteers we have, the better. And I think challenging the status quo when the status quo isn't good enough, which the vast majority of the time it isn't. And it's interesting from a media perspective, and in terms of diversity of voices. I saw, I'm afraid the MP's name now escapes me, but a Liverpool MP, and she had been asked this past week to appear on Newsnight. And she said to talk about Brexit, of course, and said, yeah, of course, you know, happy to come on. Are you in London? No, I'm in Liverpool. Oh, you know, phone put down, because, you know, she put in her tweet, you know, the BBC won't do national politics outside of interviews outside of London. Well, I mean, you know, even as a big defender of the BBC, I mean, that kind of thing just shows what a London-centric media we have, and that, you know, if you're not physically within that bubble, then your voice won't be heard. And so what hope do any of us in Leicester and other places which have such important things to say to the country and to the world, what hope do we stand? We don't stand any. And so we need to challenge the status quo, even of organisations that in general we may support, not be afraid to say to them, not good enough.
Yeah, I guess on a personal note, kind of on how I relate to my work myself, I think you have to believe that the things you think matter actually really do matter, and that at our award ceremony, actually, there was this journalist called Madison Marriage who worked for the Financial Times, and they did an expose on an event at a London hotel last year. I don't know if any of you read that story. Yeah, and it was in the Financial Times, where it's normally all business, and this story was about where there was a men's club that had been doing this event in a hotel, and only women were working at it, and they were like kind of sexually harassed throughout the event. And she went undercover and did that story. And I'd actually worked in that hotel when I was a student, and it was like not a nice place to work. But I remember thinking afterwards, God, it's funny, all those little things that you kind of think that doesn't seem right to me, somebody can put them in the national newspaper and it'll be a huge story. And I was working at the Irish Embassy at the time, and diplomats kind of were saying to each other, God, if the Financial Times is reporting about it, it really is a huge issue. And so I think that's important to remember. You could see something and think it's annoying, but what does anyone else care about it? And if the story gets pushed big enough, it can actually make a big difference. So I think that kind of sentiment is how you have to move forward.
I came across a really good quote the other day. The person who said it, surprisingly enough, is Michael Caine. It's not the one about the doors. And he said, "Don't look back in anger. Look forward in hope, and never, ever, ever dream small." I don't know where he stands on Brexit, but he's
because I think he just backed Brexit. But
I won't be surprised if he voted for Brexit. But the quote's
yeah, good quote.
And to link what you said earlier about the local, global, I think if there are successful things that are happening, like your metal festival, then there's a kind of a dialogue that can happen. It could be that you could reach out to the metal community in another country, or you could reach out to a refugee migrant poetry community in another country, or there could be amazing projects happening in other countries that we don't know about that could really inspire us. So there's definitely something about looking to your town, your region and what's happening, but also just making sure you're continuing to learn from what's happening further away.
And if I can just have one more as well, I think one thing that, I'm a cisgendered, for those who don't know what that means. That means that what I think I am relates to how I was, the genitalia that I was born with. So I'm a cisgendered, white, gay male. My lived experience isn't that of a trans woman, lesbian. But I respect what that person says about themselves. And it really is for me as simple as that. I've come to see that as chair of the LGBT Centre, that just respect what a person says about themselves. And I'm sure we all do here, but it doesn't have to be your lived experience for you to feel empathy for that person. And I think if there's one thing we increasingly have lost, not just in this country but in many parts of the world, it is the ability to empathise. And gosh, where is humanity without empathy? We're in trouble. Empathy needs a comeback.
That's a good quote.
You know what I mean.
Could be a song.
Could be a Could be a metal-based poem.
even.
Yeah,
The tool teach tactics.